Number 5. Mammon. There's nothing wrong with wanting a little, right? It's nice to want. Nothing better than having a little money and power. For most of us who weren't born into a Fortune 500 lineage, it might be a little bit tricky unless you got a little bit help. Maybe like from Mammion, the embodiment of human greed. You know, he's actually a lot more generous than his position as greed demon might suggest. You know, you don't have to do too much. If you just give over your eternal soul and pledge yourself to an eternity in his service, he might reward you with great riches. That's a pretty solid transaction. Mammoth is thought to originate from an ancient word for wealth, and it's thought that this is where Mammon was first born from. He was mankind's inherent desire for wealth and greed, twisted out of subconscious want. The Gospel of Luke and Matthew both directly quote this, saying, "You cannot serve both God and Mammon," meaning you can't have a pious life and also find yourself on a quest for massive wealth, and later taken literally to mean you can't serve one of the 7 princes of hell if you worship God. Mammon is greedy. Makes sense? He's real greedy. It's said that of all the archdukes and princes of hell, Mammon is more concerned with staring at the gold pavement than any of Lucifer's rebellion or business of the heavens, taken to mean that Mammon doesn't really concern himself with anything that doesn't involve cold, hard coin. He is on that grind set 24/7. The demon of greed has taken many forms over the years, with his most consistent depiction being that of a fairly normal-looking humanoid, looming over his subjects in a giant golden throne, looking down on those who would call for his aid. He's also associated with a wolf, and is believed to be able to take the form of one for his dealings on Earth. It's said that part of the arcane ritual to evoke Mammon's spirit is to imagine your spirit as a golden wolf calling out to him. If you do invoke Mammon, just be sure you're being reasonable with what you ask for. You never know what happens if you get too greedy. Abesathibu. It's said that when the rebellion began, Lucifer fell from heaven and was cast out alongside the other fallen angels. Well, who were the lesser-known fallen angels? Abesathibu is an obscure demon, but a threatening one nonetheless, and a very difficult name to pronounce. In the Testament of Solomon, the demon Abesathibu introduces himself as a threat to God's will, and anyone who serves God. Abesathibu rules over some dominions of hell, serving as one of Lucifer's trusted lieutenants. He was originally an angel, but unhappy, and when cast out with the rest of them, fell to earth, disfigured and vengeful. As he fell out of the kingdom of heaven, the other angels desperately grabbed at his wings to try and retrieve him. But instead of restraining him, the process ripped his wing from his back, leaving Abesathibu with a singular, dark, monstrous red wing. Although, I doubt he minds much, because to be honest, that sounds sick as all hell. It probably works really well for his demon aesthetic. Abesathibu presides over the pits of Tartarus, a unique dimension in hell originating from Greek mythology as a depth of the underworld. Abesathibu is a powerful sorcerer, boasting to King Solomon that he's far superior to the prophet Moses in every way. He brags of his sorcery and magic, being able to shift ideas and human perception in his favor, conjuring miracles, wonders, and form signs to humans, and is even able to bestow his gift to humans in exchange for favor. Abesathibu takes a particular personal pleasure in torturing God's servants out of his twisted malice for the heavens above. Thankfully, Abesathibu's cruelty was his undoing. When Moses parted the Red Sea, Abesathibu wanted to be there to see it in person, or in demon, I guess. When the Red Sea closed yet again, Abesathibu was trapped inside a pillar of air, but Beelzebub is confident he will return again. Number 3. Samael. Samael is one of the more interesting entries on this list, namely because depending on the text cited, he's either an archangel of heaven or a fallen angel serving in hell. Angels to some, demons to others, and all that. He's often referred to as the original Grim Reaper, and is thought to be where depictions of the Soul Collector stem from. Samael across most texts is known as the Angel of Death, a title that precedes itself. I mean, you hear the Angel of Death and you know I probably should not be messing with that guy, because I'm pretty sure they also call John Wick that sometimes. It's said that on the hour of a person's final release from this mortal coil, Samael will descend upon them, wings extended and sword drawn, dripping at its tip the poison that takes your life. Samael's name actually translates to Venom of God, again, in case you're wondering just how nice this guy is. Samael is known as the Accuser, the Seducer, the Destroyer, and a Midnight Joker. Samael's role as the Seducer is an essential one to the Kingdom of Heaven. He's seen as good and evil in the same measure, but he is only serving God's will. Tempting mankind is Samael's lot in life. It's been said as well that Samael is the one who planted the tree of knowledge and was the serpent who tempted Adam and Eve to bite the fruit. When Abraham was tested by God to sacrifice Isaac, it was said that Samael was the one who whispered into their ears to disobey. It's said that his ultimate goal is to bring an end to death itself, including the very concept of it. Once he's finished his ultimate mission, he'll be annihilated himself, and with death undone, his mission complete. Number 2. Mephistopheles. Imagine you could make a deal for whatever you wanted, no matter how outrageous the request. Power, influence, romance. If all it took was your soul, would you do it? Well, that's the offer Mephistopheles is prepared to make you. One of the most sinister servants in hell. Mephistopheles, or Mephisto as he's sometimes referred to, is one of Lucifer's right-hand men. Responsible for bargains and deals involving human souls, Mephistopheles takes a great sickening pleasure in luring wayward souls downwards to the underworld. If Mephistopheles has already made himself present to you, I'm afraid it's already too late to you. He doesn't go out of his way to corrupt and tempt the innocent the way other demons do, but rather he finishes the job for those who've already begun to falter on a path they can't return from. In some instances, Mephistopheles' role changes slightly. Sometimes he appears to trick people into damning themselves. In others, they're already damned and he's just finishing off the inevitable. Most famously is the legend he originates from, where the bet he places with Faust for his soul, the protagonist of the ancient German legend, who made a deal at a crossroads with Mephistopheles. In exchange for ultimate power and the servitude of Mephistopheles while Faust lives, when he passes, Faust's soul will become the property of Mephistopheles and he will enslave him and damn him for eternity. Faust got what he was promised, and the terms Faust and Faustian now became synonymous with hard bargains out of this legend. Mephistopheles knows that he's essential to the cycle of the world. He knows that as much as we hate him, we need him. He tells Faust that he's part of the dark chaos that gives birth to the light. Sure, he's offering people in exchange for eternal damnation for mortal goods, but he is inspiring people in his own twisted little way. He's trying to get you to do better so you won't hear him knocking. Number 1. Leviathan. As far as demons go, who's a bigger threat than the Leviathan? I mean, how could there even be a bigger threat? Leviathan, it's in the name. Just let that sit in your mouth for a bit and think of something big. Leviathan is thought to be the embodiment of the sin of envy, and he is one of the princes of hell and the grand admiral of hell's armies. It's tasked with pushing man towards temptation and the sin of heresy. Leviathan manifests itself as a behemoth of a creature, an incomprehensibly large sea serpent that would make H.P. Lovecraft blush. It's said to have impenetrable armored scales all over its body, and has monstrous claws as well, capable of destroying anything it would ever have to battle against, should that ever arise. It's said that it can conjure up mighty bursts of flame from its chest like a dragon. Leviathan serves as the gatekeeper of hell, with the mighty demon's very jaws serving as the gates to the underworld themselves. Said as well that Leviathan's own flesh makes up the foundations for the walls of hell, and it feasts upon souls that attempt to escape the underworld. Foolishly, of course. As far as demonic power levels go, making up the literal corners of the underworld have got to count for something. How many demons can claim to be so hardcore they practically are hell? I can see why he's such a trusted lieutenant. Number 5, Pazuzu. Our first terrifying demon up on this list has made quite the career for himself in pop culture. He's picked up some small gigs here and there. He's serving as a sort of mascot of sorts for the real fake band Gorillaz, multiple cameos on Futurama, and won some acclaim for his star-studded role in The Exorcist, possessing Reagan and making us all afraid of pea soup. Although his real historical background is far more interesting than any of his pop culture appearances. Pazuzu has been around for a long time, first being recorded as a Babylonian demon wind god, who was always playing both sides so he'd come out on top. He was a god of wind, and it was thought that the wind ravaging, storms, and locusts were all byproducts of Pazuzu's rage. But he was also thought to be a protector. He would protect the home, taking a particular liking to watching over pregnant women. He was an incredibly destructive force in nature, and when it would come time to throw down, Pazuzu would fly across the world, breaking the wings of other demons to prevent them from getting into any trouble. Sort of like a demonic Batman. His portrayal in The Exorcist is probably where most people know him from and assume those things about him, where he's seen as a much more plain Jane possessing demon, lacking his impressive wings and other traits, and not doing a whole lot of flying around or anything with the wind, focusing a lot more on projectile vomiting and harassing a couple of priests. The real Pazuzu is a lot cooler than his exorcist appearance, but no doubt more people know about that than they do an ancient Babylonian wind god. I don't think I'd like to spend much time with either incarnation face to face, and those priests definitely didn't want to either. Now ghouls, goblins, lend me your ears, and subscribe if you wouldn't mind. Number 4. Belphegor. Now another demon who's had his moment in pop culture. Maybe you recognize Belphegor from Supernatural's first fledgling season, all the way back when the boys were wide-eyed and hadn't even died once yet. Or maybe if you're a Persona fan, you recognize Belphegor as the perpetually bored demon on the can. It's a video game with a talking cat. And you play as a guy who's got a healthy sleep schedule and can manage his social circle well. It's not a game focused on realism. But it turns out, doing a little research, there was a reason for this foul demon's appearance. One of the 7 princes of hell, the demonic icon of sloth's favorite offering isn't blood or a fresh goat, but a little mud pie, feces if you want to get scientific with it. Look, I'm not going to judge, and I'm not going to ask what he's doing with it. Old lore just says that if you wanted to summon Belphegor, you had to bring him a lot of feces. There's no metric volume ever listed, just a lot. If you do summon him, he'll trade you wondrous riches, expand your ability to discover new things, expand your consciousness, but at the cost of the temptation of your mortal soul, and you'll also probably never be able to wash your hands clean again. I'm sorry, I don't usually work so blue. It's the lazy man's comedy, although perchance that's fitting for the demon prince of sloth. Belphegor has been depicted in all manner of ways over the years, appearing sometimes as esoteric things like tree branches, or sometimes taking the form of beautiful women. But one wood carving in the 18th century of him sitting on an 18th century John sealed his fate pretty much forever, and then since then, he's almost always been depicted as a horned demon sitting on a throne of sorts. Belphegor, I want to make something clear here. I'm not making fun of you. I'm trying to make sense of all this. Number 3, the Legion. Now, this next demon is a tiny bit of a cheat because although it's supposed to be a top 5 list, I'm about to make it a top 500,000 list. This next demon is known as the Legion, for it is many. The Legion's first documented recording is from the Gospel of Mark, where Jesus Christ encountered a man possessed by a demon. When he spoke to the man in an effort to exorcise him, he asked for the name of the demon inside him, and the man responded, Legion, for there were many devils inside him. Upon being exorcised from the man, the Legion asked if it could instead be transferred to a herd of pigs, which he then obliged. Now the Legion is pretty atypical when it comes to demons. It's not the prince of anything, it's not the manifestation of any one sin, and it's not any one thing at all. The Legion is made of countless demons that all function together in unison like a hive mind. When one has a thought, the rest of the Legion obeys. When one member of the Legion speaks, the rest of them speak all at once. Now sometimes the armies of Satan are referred to as the legions of hell, but I guess the Legion is a separate thing altogether. It must make filling out forms very difficult. No one's really sure what sort of demons the Legion are or what they look like even. It's just agreed that there's a lot of them all working together on their common goals. Like I said, no one really knows what they look like, but if you've ever seen a horde of, anything all in one place, you can't imagine that it would be anything pleasant. Now the Legion isn't as much of a pop culture starlet as some of the other demons I've mentioned on this list, but that doesn't mean that it's influenced things in pop culture. The phrase Legion, for we are many, appears in all sorts of different things, probably because it's just a very cool way to describe yourself. A recurring boss fight in the Castlevania video games called Legion appears as a writhing mass of bodies, no doubt inspired by the story. And the character in Mass Effect, named Legion, is an AI life form comprised of thousands of individual AI working in tandem, who directly references the story, introducing itself, saying, "We are Legion, for we are many." And while I'm on it, Legion was the entire best character in Mass Effect, but that's neither here nor there. Sleep easy, big guy. Number 2, Beelzebub. Now we're getting into the big hitters. Beelzebub is thought to be one of the first angels to have ever fallen to hell, alongside Leviathan and Lucifer himself. He and Lucifer actually have a bit of an identity crisis, as the two are sometimes thought to be interchangeable. They must have similar haircuts. Some demonologists argue that Beelzebub is another name for Lucifer, and some others pose that he's one of his most trusted lieutenants. But whatever Beelzebub is, everyone can agree that he's pretty horrifying. His history is fairly interesting. It's thought that his namesake is a mockery of the god Baal, an ancient Bronze Age god of fertility. Some scholars believe that Beelzebub's name comes from Baal-zebub, translating to Lord of the Flies, inferring that the followers of Baal are nothing more than flies worshipping a dung god. They didn't get the memo that Belphegor was the dung god. The Lord of the Flies sort of ended up becoming Beelzebub's title, with almost all depictions of the demon featuring flies in ubiquitous amounts around him. Occasionally he's even depicted as a giant fly. It's very Kafkaesque. Beelzebub is said to be one of the most powerful demons inside of Hell's domain, capable of great control over humanity, able to tempt them. Beelzebub was cited during the Salem witch trials as the entity that had corrupted and swayed so many women to witchery. Now there's some discrepancy as to what sin Beelzebub is thought to preside over, with some offerings saying that he represents pride, some others saying that he represents gluttony, which I would say probably seems a little more fitting for a fly demon anyway, and he's most commonly associated with gluttony. Number 1, Asmodeus. Yeah, it probably would have made a lot of sense to have Lucifer as the number 1 spot on this list. I mean, he's the king of hell and all that. So let's just take this moment, give him an honorable mention, and say he's at the number 0 spot. Just because I thought it was a little obvious, and I'm pretty sure you know who Satan is, and there's other demons we could talk about, bring up some unknown ones. So filling in at the number 1 spot is Asmodeus, one of the princes of hell and the embodiment of the cardinal sin of lust. Asmodeus fell from heaven alongside the other fallen angels, reforming as a prince of hell. Asmodeus is said to have been married to Lilith, the primordial she-demon, famed for her banishing from the Garden of Eden and famed for destroying Frasier Crane. Lilith was cursed and banished for her defilement and depicted as a temptress, and Asmodeus saw all that and was like, hey girl, I'm into all that stuff. You want to procreate an endless stream of demons into the world and reign over a dominion of chaos? And the rest is wedded bliss. Depictions of Asmodeus vary pretty wildly from case to case. Occasionally he's drawn as a handsome young fella, but most commonly he's depicted as a squat, vaguely humanoid creature with a rooster leg, the tail of a snake, 3 heads, comprising of a bull, a goat, and a scruffy demon head as the center. Asmodeus presides over lust with the help of his beloved Lilith, and the two tempt humans with madness and desire to ruin people with lechery. Somehow this wasn't enough for Asmodeus though, as some stories also describe Asmodeus as having command over the betting halls of hell and is responsible for tempting man's souls towards gambling. So what I am hearing from this is that Asmodeus probably parties harder than any demon out there.
Number 5, the Lernean Hydra. I'm no Hercules per se. Yeah, nothing. But thankfully, actually, because those are pretty big shoes to fill. Because that dude had to be brave beyond just like deep breaths and good pep talks. Guy had to literally fight like a 10-story condo building. How does one dude equipped with a club and a sword kill a 10-story building with teeth and 3 heads? Well, 5 heads. Well, 10 heads. Depending on how many you cut off, I guess. I guess that's why his name will be remembered and mine will be lost at sea. I guess he was a demigod, half powerful, half regular. A little unfair. By the way, which Hercules did you grow up on? I grew up on the Disney version, and Kevin Sorbo. Ugh, what a hunk. But there's been a lot, including the ancient real guy. She's known as simply the Hydra. As a serpentine water monster in Greek and Roman mythology, it's terrifying. Its lair was at the Lake of Lerna, also known to be the entrance of the underworld. Yikes. In the myth, the monster is killed by Hercules, as the second of his 12 labors. Okay, so this guy did it and then went on to go and do like 10 more. 10-0. Like, how hard can it be, right? I mean, it does have multiple heads. Yeah, it does have that. Also, apparently has poisonous breath and blood so violent that its scent is even deadly. Later versions of the Hydra story added regeneration to the monster's abilities too, so it can just start growing heads back at will. For every head chopped off, the Hydra would regrow 2 heads. So every time the Meg bites a head, there's 2 more. Another 2 are growing. Yeah, good thing this thing was hungry and swallows whales whole, because that's gonna be a lot of protein. Number 4, Jormungandr. Keeping it in the mythology department, we head up a little north. Jormungandr, aka Huge Monster, also known as the Midgard Serpent or the World Serpent. It is a sea serpent and the middle child of Loki and giantess Angrboda. And those middle children, huh? Always the problem kids. I would know. I am one. According to the prose Edda, Odin took Loki's 3 children by Angrboda, Fenrir, Hel, and Jormungandr, and tossed Jormungandr into the great ocean. The serpent grew so large that it was able to surround the entire earth and grasp it in its own tail, as it's referred to as, well, the World Serpent. And apparently, when it releases its tail, Ragnarok will begin. Yeah, basically a destruction to the end of the world. Yeah, all this rich history is so heavy. and gloomy, isn't it? Isn't there like a, the sun will shine like California for all to enjoy? Like, where's that written down? Nowhere, huh? Just cataclysms and monsters. Jormungandr's arch enemy is the thunder god Thor. And apparently a megalodon too. Cause let's face it, a giant serpent versus a 4-story great white, it would definitely be a good fight. I think if Thor showed up and started smashing up both, it would literally be the best Marvel Universe movie yet. Another encounter comes when Thor goes fishing with the giant Hymir. When Hymir refuses to provide Thor with bait, he strikes the head off Hymir's largest ox to use as his bait. Okay, easy, Roid Rage. Sheesh. They row to a point where Hymir fishes, he prepares his fishing line and a large hook and baits it with the ox head, which Jormungandr bites. Thor then yanks the serpent up from the water and the two throw hands. Okay, so it sounds like it isn't that big. I mean, it's huge, but the wrapping around the planet has got my dimensions off. Maybe it was like a metric versus imperial thing back then. I don't know, what do you think? Comment down below who would win, because when it gets into mystical powers and stuff, it becomes a little unfairly matched, no? Number 3, Cthulhu. Come on, we know this guy. Now this would be a good fight. This is sort of fathomable. Well, kinda. An extinct shark versus a made-up ender of worlds. Cool, let's do that. Basically a giant humanoid octopus dragon versus the Carcharasaurus megalodon. A triplex-size apex predator. It's definitely gonna be in Vegas, and pay-per-view, I'll tell you that for free. Cthulhu is a fictional cosmic horror entity thought up by the twisted mind of cosmic horror writer H.P. Lovecraft. First introduced in his short story called The Call of Cthulhu, published by the American pulp magazine Weird Tales in 1928. He's like the first creature Lovecraft pondered up. He's terrifying. He's supposed to bring Armageddon upon us when he wakes up from the bottom of the ocean. Yeah, again, not all sunshine and rainbows with these stories. Actually, like, ever with these stories. Cthulhu is a great old one, almost the god of all gods in these stories. All these characters intertwine, and apparently he's our last call. Lovecraft depicts it as a gigantic entity worshipped by cultists in the shape of a green octopus dragon humanoid bipedal creature. And it's like 10 stories high. Yeah, like massive. Like us looking at toy army men. The Lovecraft universe, aka the Cthulhu mythos, its appearance alone is enough to haunt your dreams. Lovecraft describes this guy as a face full of octopus-like feelers, a scaly, rubbery-looking body, sharp claws on its hands and feet, and of course, dragon's wings. So it can fly and swim. In other words, the worst thing you can imagine. Yeah. Cthulhu can fly, which he has on the Meg, for sure. And also, the mind control, I don't know how sharks' brains works, but Cthulhu gets in there, yeah, you're in trouble, Sharky. Number 2, the Leviathan. Okay, so we're diving into some very sacred texts now, the Bible. In said pieces of scripture, there's a tale of a giant creature that could swallow up cities, apparently, and is also an awesome roller coaster at Canada's Wonderland. Gotta try it if you haven't been on it yet. This twisty, turny, vicious monster was actually modeled after this twisty, turny, vicious monster, the Leviathan, the second of the great monsters described in the book of Job. This Leviathan is an absolute unit of a sea monster who's impervious to literally any human weapon. I mean, what were the weapons back then though? Like bows and arrows, swords maybe, little pokey things, you know? It's not gonna do much. Apparently locusts too, yeah, those are terrifying. This Leviathan breathes fire. It emits smoke from its nostrils, and it's related to another ancient monster called Lotan, a 7-headed giant serpent who's represented as pure chaos. I mean, what Bible creature isn't terrifying though? Was this giant sea snake a water dragon? Because apparently it's something like 300 miles long according to the Bible. So it's like Jormungandr territory, but longer. Maybe it's the same creature, told by two different peoples? Mind blown. Again, the Megalodon I think would just chomp this thing and dive deep down to the Twilight Zone and it's lights out. We've seen Jaws, right? Yeah, picture that but like 40 times the size. Yeah, we're gonna need a bigger boat. Number 1, Godzilla. I had to, obviously, we're having fun here today. Godzilla, yes, of course, the king of kings, aka kaiju, originates from a series of Japanese films. The character first appeared in the 1954 film Godzilla and became a worldwide pop culture icon ever since. Appearing in a ton of different media, 32 films, 4 American films, video games, novels, comic books, TV shows, you name it. Godzilla has been, like I said, the king of all monsters. Of course, a phrase first used in Godzilla, King of Monsters. Godzilla is enormous. It's destructive. It's a prehistoric sea monster awakened and empowered by nuclear radiation. With the nuclear incidents of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the Lucky Dragon 5 incident, Godzilla doesn't really like nukes. Yeah. The amphibious reptilian monster is basically based around a concept of a dinosaur, erect, standing up, very tall. Of course, a bony plated back and tail, and let's not forget the special abilities Godzilla has as well. Atomic heat beams, or as I like to call it, stank breath. Dude had tonsil stones so bad, nuclear energy generates from them. Well, not really, but inside of his body using electromagnetic force to concentrate it into a laser radioactive beam. Amphibious, of course, so it swims and breathes underwater, which is gonna come in handy. Immune to conventional weapons and can regenerate. Yeah. And it's massive. Of course, Godzilla was said to average around 150 feet tall. In the American version, Godzilla is like 400 feet tall. Like, just a little bit bigger. This is kind of a no-brainer here, obviously, right? This little sunfish would have nothing on the king.
Number 5, oarfish. Coming in at the number 5 spot is this terrifying 16-foot long monstrosity hauled out of the ocean by Chilean fishermen. Shocking those who learned, like me, that fish can be 5 meters long sometimes. The clip was posted to TikTok, where it went viral almost immediately, sweeping up 10 million views pretty quickly. Most people worried this fish might be a bringer of bad times, and there might be an inkling of truth to that. This fish, called an oarfish, is thought in some cultures to be an omen of impending bad fortune. I mean, I understand it completely. If I picked this thing out of the water, I would not think that I had been blessed by good fortune. In Japanese folklore, this fish is sometimes referred to as Ryogo no Tsukai, translating to the messenger from the sea god's palace, and I'm sure I butchered that pronunciation. I'm so very sorry. It's linked to the legend of Namazu, a giant sea snake which caused earthquakes whenever it would rise. Oarfish live deep in the depths of the sea. And some scientists theorize that they only ever rise nearer to surface level whenever there's a disturbance in the tectonic plates, which would definitely make this fish a bad omen and a bringer of earthquakes. Now, the actual oarfish, once you get aside all the legend, terrifying as it might look, is a bit of a gentle giant. It's the largest bony fish in the world, and it isn't much of a predator, preferring to swim around just hoovering up plankton. They barely even have teeth, to be honest, and they don't really pose a threat to humans. Unless you consider scaring the heck out of you a threat. You want to watch more scary sea creature videos? Well, I got great news for you because we have loads upon loads on the channel. Number 4, green-eyed shark. Now, if the ocean is where all the scariest stuff in the world is hiding, that goes triple for any body of water around Australia, which is home to some of the actual most terrifying entities ever to walk the planet, and swim the planet, and fly the planet. It's where they send the animals that are too hardcore for the rest of the world. An Australian angler, Trapman Bermagee, pulled out this disgusting wretch of a fish, some 2,000 feet beneath the sea. He captioned it, "The face of a deep-sea rough-skinned shark." A little bit of a fake Australian accent there, I can't help it. Unsurprisingly, most commenters wanted to point out how disgusting the thing was, which is very similar to what I'm doing now. Now, usually I'm a sucker for green eyes, but not on this leathery little monster. This thing looks like a baseball glove that came to life. I'm not having it. There's actually a lot of debate as to what this little thing is. Some commenters had suggested that it was a cookie cutter shark, which might sound adorable when you hear that. That sounds pretty cute, but I promise you it is not cute at all. A cookie cutter shark is named that because of its jagged mouth, which leaves cookie cutter-like imprints on its victims, just like big holes in anything that it's biting at. However, the fisherman pointed out this wasn't a cookie cutter shark. A cookie cutter shark looks absolutely vile, but in a very different way. A cookie cutter shark looks more like a mole rat that was left in the sun for a few weeks, whereas this thing looks like it was grilled before ever being born. Now, another commenter suggested that this shark could be something called an endeavor spur dog shark, which is a mouthful and a half. Now, whatever the creature is, it goes without saying, I want very little to do with this shark. Number 3, long-nosed chimera. You wouldn't really expect anything horrifying to exist in Newfoundland. It's a very pleasant place. You think it's mostly just chips and Jig's dinner all the way down. Well, for Gary Goodyear, a fisherman out of Templeman, Newfoundland, he pulled this long-nosed chimera out of the water and gave himself quite the shock. His nets went some 2,000 feet down into the water, where he unearthed this long-beaked mystery fish. When he pulled it up, the crew could not believe what they had seen. It was not at all what they were expecting. I have to include this quote from one of the articles because it's too newfie not to include. Goodyear said, "We're hauling away and by I seen this coming around the roller. I said, good God, what in the heck is that?" Now, when he first pulled it up, he wondered at first if it might have been a platypus because of the impressive snoot on the beast. He described this pelagic nightmare's beak as being very rubbery, like cartilage. No one on the boat had any idea what they had found, so they kept the body of the fish and took it to a local fishery in the hopes that someone could properly ID their mystery monster. Luckily, somebody actually knew and it got correctly identified as a long-nosed chimera, an ancient deep-sea dwelling fish famous for its green eyes and, putting this gently, its monstrous appearance. The reason that its nose felt like cartilage is because the fish is completely cartilage from nose to tail. It's actually boneless. So this fish is a spineless coward. The creature most likely perished as it was being pulled up. An extreme pressure change from being 2,000 feet beneath the sea gave it a serious case of the bends. Maybe was a blessing in disguise, because I'm not sure I'd want to see this thing alive. I'm not sure I'd want to see it thrashing around on the floor of a commercial fishing boat. I think that wouldn't be good for anybody. Number 2, decorator crab. Our next spot comes to us all the way from Thailand. Some local fishermen in Koh Yao Noi pulled up their nets while fishing for crabs and discovered they'd brought up an alien-looking creature with them that mystified them. They couldn't identify this thing. Take a look at this creepy little crawly. Kinda looks like a spider that's got a good fashion sense, got really into accessorizing. But it almost kinda looks like it shouldn't be moving at all. Like it's just some garbage that got cursed into being alive, or maybe some seaweed that developed sentience. The fishermen were understandably pretty puzzled by this thing, so they decided to post a video of the then unidentified critter, hoping to get some answers, and for once, the internet was actually helpful. The creature was correctly identified as a decorator crab, which is not something I'd heard of before this video, but I am so glad I learned about it, and I am even happier that I can pass it on to you. A decorator crab gets its name for its habit of using whatever it can scavenge around its environment to make into camouflage from predators. Now the really cool thing is that they'll use literally anything they can find. Debris, garbage, they'll even use little bits of other animals in a gruesome manner, like fins or parts of a crab shell. If it can be attached to it in some way, a decorator crab will stick it to itself. They're covered in tiny Velcro-like hairs that allow them to attach their findings easily. I would love having that. It would save me so much time getting dressed. They've been recorded chewing on things like kelp or seaweed to break them down into more easily attachable accessories. Now, most of the creatures on this list have been weird and scary and kind of look horrifying. And I'm not gonna lie, the decorator crab kind of looks pretty scary too, but I absolutely adore the decorator crab. It is showing up every other creature in the ocean when it comes to outfits. I love the garbage costume. It's given camp in a very good way. This thing is like a crab Lady Gaga, and I love it. Number 1, ghost shark. Roman Fedortsov routinely entertains his 600,000 Instagram followers with pictures of all the strange creatures he fishes up while sailing around Murmansk, a port city in Russia. His Instagram is a treasure trove of scary undersea finds, and I absolutely recommend that you toss him a follow if you're into this sort of thing, as he's kind of the head honcho for it. This video could easily just have been 5 things that he fished out himself. Nobody is pulling out weird things the way Roman is. But with so many to choose from, I had a tough time, but I landed on this here fish, sometimes called Frankenstein's fish, due to the stitches all over its body looking like it's been sewn together from the bodies of several other fishes. It's also been referred to as a rat fish, a ghost shark, a spook fish, but officially they're known as ghost chimeras. I like that it's got nothing but scary nicknames. These things are bad news from teeth to tail. They have a spiny dorsal fin that's poisonous to the touch. It's got a mouth of rat-like teeth that helps it grind down anything it catches, crushing its prey in its jaws. Usually goes after things like crabs or prawns, so the rat teeth help pulverize the shells. These little things also have an inherent ability to detect the electric fields produced by other creatures, and I wish I knew even the littlest bit about biology, because this fish sounds like it's magic. Fish also sounds overpowered, not gonna lie. Now, I think as a little treat, we ought to have a little slideshow at the end of just a bunch of Fedortsov's weirdest catches, and I'll just react to them. Ready? Okay, here we go, lightning round. Who would make this? Why would a creature evolve like this? I guarantee you this thing looks cuter as sashimi. That is a face not even Mother Nature could love, if that even is a face. You know what, this one I'm actually kind of coming around to. I wouldn't touch it, I wouldn't order it, but I kind of like it. Number 5, Ningen. Our first creature to grace this list is the Ningen. I've actually talked about these things on the channel before, but it's always good to get a refresher, especially when the subject in question is cryptids. This information might just save your life someday. Or at the very least, it gives you something interesting to talk about at a party. Either or, you're learning something today. The Ningen is a cryptid that is a large aquatic whale or seal-like humanoid entity. Ningen actually translates to human in Japanese, stemming from the creature's often humanoid appearance compared to other cryptids. Marked by its blank expression coloration and indiscernible features save for beady black eyes. The Ningen is a 30-meter long heaving beast frequently spotted around the Arctic and Antarctic oceans. The Ningen first rose to prominence in 2012 when it caught mainstream public attention on a Japanese paranormal forum. The legend began when a user posted a story of a whaling research crew that was sailing through the passage and saw something they didn't recognize under the water. Initially, the research staff assumed that it was a submarine, although there shouldn't have been any other vessels around. But they found that when they tried to get a closer look to ID the submarine, it had vanished entirely. While this was one of the first popularized cases of the Ningen, legends have actually predated this, with the first ever sighting thought to be traced back to 2005, when images from Google Earth revealed what looked like strange creatures inhabiting the area around icebergs. Skeptics believe that sightings of the Ningen could just be fragments of icebergs appearing to our eyes, and we want to see them as monsters, but I'd argue a creature like the Ningen must have some degree of camouflage. It's an all-white entity, it's reasonable to assume it evolved to avoid human eyes and blend in with the surroundings. It's unclear if the Ningen is a predatory cryptid, as all sightings of it reported as being benign or simply investigating humans. They don't appear to have any particular interest in aggravating us, as no attacks have ever been recorded or any cases of missing researchers involved. Perhaps it's as curious about what we are as we are curious of it. And hey, my delightful little ghouls and goblins, if you're curious about cryptids, well, there's simply nowhere else on the internet that's going to satisfy you as much as Top 5 Scary. And maybe the Cryptid Wiki, but they don't do videos. So click through and subscribe to Top 5 Scary and keep the screams coming all night long. Let's keep going. Number 4. Garappa. Garappa the Rappa. Sorry. Just Garappa. Garappa is an aquatic cryptid and not to be mistaken with its regional counterpart, the Kappa. Garappa, Arctic. Kappa, not Arctic. Write that down because there will be a test at the end of this video, and if you fail, I don't know what'll happen, but it's gonna be bad. Garappa is so fun to say though. I'm gonna throw that out there. Try that on for size at home. Tell me it doesn't feel fun coming out of your lips. I gotta get on topic here. Similar to a Kappa, a Garappa is described as having long, slender limbs like a frog or a monkey, and a turtle's shell on its back. It has a beak like a duck, long, stringy black hair, and a bony plate or a dish on top of its head that also makes for a good ashtray. You'll recognize if a Garappa is around because of the call it makes, a distinctive, and forgive me for this if it's not perfectly accurate, hyo hyo sound. Although a Garappa may appear outwardly threatening, a Garappa is mostly shy creature, and they don't want the attention drawn onto them. I'm probably not helping the community much by discussing them here with you. They're shy and solitary, and usually keep to themselves, and usually tend to live in isolated communities by themselves, or with a few other Garappa. Despite their shyness though, they are reported to be incredibly strong, and can easily overpower a human if a fight were to occur. Some legends report too, the Garappa are a bit of a prankster and cause all kinds of mischief. They're able to mimic human voices. They say if you do capture one, a Garappa will do anything it can to escape, pleading with you, promising to leave people alone, to stop causing mischief, to stop luring people away, so they're not all bad. Number 3. Aklut. Coming up next on the list is a beast called the Aklut. If we're ranking based solely on appearances, well, this is one of the coolest cryptids I have ever seen in my hundreds of years inside the fog making videos for this channel. The Aklut is an Inuit legend, and is sometimes described as the whale wolf, which, come on, that is the coolest thing I have ever heard, whale wolf. Depending on the legend, sometimes the Aklut is described as being a hybrid, chimera-like creature, looking like a wolf with like a fin on the back of it, but other times it's purported that it can alternate between the two forms at will, and take the form that it pleases to suit it best for whatever it needs. They're said to be around if you can find trails of paw prints and dog tracks that lead into ocean waters, or seeing dog tracks around where there shouldn't conceivably be any in the Arctic. The whale that an Aklut takes the form of is predominantly described as an orca, and interestingly, another name for an orca is a sea wolf, lending some credence to the folklore. Stemming from early days beliefs when storytellers believed that all land animals had aquatic equivalents, like sea cows and so on. Not much is known outright about Aklut, instead what is passed from folklore. They're thought to be dangerously vicious towards humans, which makes sense considering both of the things that they are pretty nasty with some gnarly teeth. There aren't too many recorded sightings, although if they're shape-shifting creatures, who's to say you haven't seen dozens upon dozens of them without even knowing? Unless you don't spend too much time in the Arctic, I suppose, then you probably haven't seen any. There is one legend in particular I found that stood out for me. It tells the tale of an Inuit man who becomes obsessed with the sea and wants to be part of it. He returns returns from a fishing expedition to his village, but his obsession with the ocean has driven him too isolated to relate to the village anymore, and he finds himself in exile. He sets out and lives with a pack of wolves, but his affection for the ocean never dwindles. He casts himself out into the ocean to preserve himself forever in its waters, and through the malevolent energy inside him, he transforms into an orca. He spends his days swimming in the oceans as an orca, but whenever his hunger and his lust for revenge is awoken, he can return to the land and take a form as a wolf. Number 2. Hook Island Sea Monster. The Hook Island Sea Monster is a sea monster that originates from Hook Island, right? That's all the information we've got. Moving on, okay? Oh, nope, new information just came in. Okay, yeah, this is good. The beast is a 90-foot long black sea monster that resembles a massive tadpole. The thing was first sighted dating all the way back to 1964 by one Robert Leviathan. Leviathan was a sailor who was traveling with his family on an unknown expedition, who spotted the creature underneath the water, moving towards his ship with what seemed like an open maw ready to strike. Leviathan noted that its tail appeared to be damaged, but he was unsure as to what could have caused lacerations on such a massive entity. He described it as, "Only when I got to within 20 feet of the creature that we could see its head clearly. The head was large, about 4 feet from top to bottom, with jaws about 4 feet wide. The lower jaw was flat like that of a sandfish. The skin was smooth, but rather dull, brownish black in color. The eyes seemed pale green, close to white. The skin looked more like that of a shark than it did an eel. There were no apparent scales, nor did we see any parasites around. We suppose the flexible tail would have shaken any off. There were no fins or spines, nor were there any apparent breathing openings, although there had to have been some. Perhaps we didn't see them because our attention was focused mainly on the creature's menacing mouth, the inside of which was whitish. The teeth appeared to be small. A fragment of some dark substance hung from the upper row of teeth, possibly a fish. As the monster was lying on the sandy bottom, we could not see the color of its belly. The creature looked to be about 90 feet long. Behind its body was 2 feet 4 inches thick and remained that way for about 25 feet. Then it gradually tapers off into a whip-like tail. The general color of the body was black with 1 foot wide brownish rings every 5 feet, the first starting just behind the head. The skin was smooth but dull. Aside from this detailed description, Leviathan captured a few photos of the beast, although there has been some argument and debate as to the validity of the photos. But, Photoshop didn't exist in the 1960s, so there's no way that these could be photoshopped. Duh. Number 1. Organism 46b. Our number 1 creature is something called Organism 46b. Maybe it's an SCP that hasn't been classified yet. Organism 46 was discovered in Lake Vostok, a subglacial lake located under 2 miles of ice beneath the Vostok Station and the Antarctic, a Soviet research station established sometime in 1957. Organism 46b in question was an absolutely massive 33-foot long, 14-tentacled creature that displayed unimaginable abilities, some bordering on not being of this world. In studies, it was shown to have limbs that were capable of retaining autonomy, aggression, and even animation after being separated. It's been purported to have a toxin inside its body that is capable of releasing to immobilize prey from far away, and all studies of it showed that it is incredibly hostile. Makes sense. The legend of Organism 46b stems from an unknown date between February 2012 and November 2016. Pinpointing the location of that first true sighting has proved to be difficult. After 30 years of ice core drilling, miners at Vostok Station breached through to the lake in 2012, which is where the story comes from. The doctor who claims to have first discovered the creature is one Anton Padalka, although tracking him down has also been difficult. Entirely possible he's gone into hiding. He writes, "We encountered this organism, which we named 46b on our first day. It disabled our radio, which we later learned was intentional. It's also able to paralyze prey from a distance of 150 feet away by releasing venom into the water. Tragically, my colleague and my lifelong friend lost his life this way. He tread water wearing a blissful smile as the organism approached him. We watched helplessly as it used its arms to tear off his head and then popped the remains in his mouth. It was as if he'd been hypnotized telepathically. Eventually, the crew was able to trap the creature in a tank, and the surviving team gave the organism off to the Russian government, where presumably it was studied. But you want this Crypt Keeper's opinion? Almost certainly a beast like this was taken to the SCP Foundation, where it could be properly secured, contained, and protected. I'd urge you to click through on the channel and hear some of our reports on the SCP Foundation if you're not familiar with the organization already. It's illuminating stuff. Number 5. Bunyip. Coming in at the number 5 spot is the Bunyip, which, from the name alone, you might be forgiven for thinking it sounds kinda cute. The Bunyip is a creature from Aboriginal Australian folklore. Its name literally means devil or evil spirit, translated from the Wemba Wemba language. The Bunyip is an aquatic predator. with many varying descriptions of it. Sometimes it sorta looks like a hippo, sometimes it looks like a cross between a giant cat and a giant dog, but with like tusks and fangs and all sorts of sharp bits, and sometimes it's just like a totally incomprehensible, long, snake-like twisty being. The only real common across all depictions of the bunyip is that it is a ferocious creature in its own right. Over the years, there have been a number of reported sightings or findings of mysterious bones in southern Australia that led early settlers and colonists to believe the bunyip was a new creature out there waiting to be discovered. It inhabits swamps, rivers, and lakes, basically anywhere wet that it can hide itself and lurk for prey, dragging everything underwater. The first recorded sighting of it, or story about it, by Australian settlers was in 1851, when a tracing of the creature's body was discovered near a riverbank in Ararat, Victoria. Local Aboriginal hunters had speared an unknown beast after a member of their tribe had been felled, and made an imprint of the creature's body to remember it by, described by one newspaper journalist as 11 paces long and 4 paces wide in extreme depth. This outline sadly no longer exists and is lost to time, but it was enough to spur an interest and a hunt for this possibly mythical, possibly real creature that's now become sort of a folk symbol for Australia. They love it down there. And hey folks, if you love hearing about cryptids, creepy crawlies, crypts, crooks, and everything that goes bump in the night, then you are already in the best spot on YouTube for that. Consider tossing a subscribe our way and stick around for loads more scary content every day. Alright, let's keep on going. Number 4. Koshai. The Koshai is a creature that features prominently in Slavic folklore, sometimes known as the Immortal or the Deathless. The Koshai is a shapeshifter capable of taking many forms, but it's always described as being hideously ugly, no matter the form. When it's a human, it prefers to ride naked on its horse through the mountains and manifests as a sort of wrinkly old man. But when it's looking for victims to sweep up, it can take the form of a giant whirlwind tornado to hoover up potential targets. Now my favorite thing about the Koshai is his craftiness. Although there are many tales that Koshai appears in, the most common feature of all of them is a spell which prevents him from dying, hence the names the Immortal, the Deathless. But the way he does this is really something else. He does this by literally hiding his soul away inside nesting objects to protect it. So, first he puts his soul inside a needle, then he hides that inside an egg, and then the egg is inside a duck, and the duck is inside a rabbit, and the rabbit's inside a chest, and the chest is chained up and buried on a far, far away island. So he's really got a backup plan if you're trying to get at his soul. It's gonna take more than one step. Another fairly common element of folklore present for the Koshai is his lecherous, womanizing ways, as he's often presented as an antagonist for a male suitor, with his most well-known legend being his rivalry with Prince Ivan Tsarevich, a Russian folk hero. In this legend, Ivan was a lonely prince who'd seen all 3 of his sisters married to 3 powerful wizards but was a bachelor himself. Honestly, if all my family members got married to wizards, I would be incredibly jealous and lonely, so I get where he was coming from. Eventually, he traveled the lands looking for a woman to make his queen and met a lovely warrior woman who soon left for war and left him behind, pleading not to open the door in their castle, which held an imprisoned man in chains. When Ivan freed him, he learned he'd been tricked by Koshai, who tried to steal his wife away from him. With a little help from Baba Yaga, his wizards-in-law, and a little bit of guile, Ivan was able to fell Koshai the Deathless. Whether or not it was actually permanent though, well, that's anyone's guess. He is deathless after all. Number 3. The Chimera. The Chimera is a creature of Greek myth and is basically something of a Frankenstein monster of all the worst parts of a bunch of angry creatures taped together. It's got the head of a lion, the body of a goat, and most scary of all, the butt of a dragon. But it's also depicted as having 3 extremely angry fire-breathing heads of a lion, goat, and a dragon. Sometimes it's even described as having a serpent in place of its tail, who is probably getting the worst deal out of all the creatures in that arrangement. The creature was thought to be of divine origin. Whether a product of the gods or something more sinister is unknown, but the Chimera was downright nasty. I mean, it's a 3-headed monster that breathes fire. There was no way that it was gonna go around and be a service to the community. Anyway, in the Greek myth of yore, the Chimera was slain by Bellerophon, the son of Poseidon and the master of the mighty Pegasus, the winged horse. He was exiled after slaying his brother, but sought redemption because it was a bit of a misunderstanding. So from there on out, Bellerophon gets sent all over town doing favors for local kings, befriending local winged horses that are drinking from fountains, you know, standard issue hero stuff. Eventually making his way to an audience with King Iobates, who had the biggest challenge for him yet to defeat the Chimera in single combat. As frightening as the Chimera was, it was slain by Bellerophon, who drove a lead-tipped spear directly into its flaming gullet, which I guess it couldn't handle. Number 2. Cerberus. Another fabled creature of Greek myth, coming up on the number 2 spot, is hell's most loyal watchdog and a very good boy. Cerberus serves as the guardian of the gates of the underworld and is an unbelievably big 3-headed dog. He's there to make sure that no one escapes the punishment they've been served, and if somehow someone was to try and escape the underworld, like say any would-be heroes of myth or any bratty sons of Hades, they'd have to deal with the infernal guardian. Cerberus has a pretty storied family history, being the son of Typhoeus and Echidna, both themselves pretty horrifying monstrosities in their own right. He's the brother of Orthus, who is a giant 2-headed dog who probably would have been a lot more famous were it not for his 3-headed brother. Interestingly, there's actually also some historical discrepancy about Cerberus and his many heads. While almost all depictions ubiquitously show Cerberus having 3 heads, the poet Hesiod described Cerberus as a beast with 50 heads or more, which is a little unsettling to consider. Although, honestly, I feel like that many dog heads all in one place, it would start to get cute in its own way. Now, Cerberus gets a bit of a bad rap. He's done damage to the giant 3-headed dog community, but he has been known to be friendly. In the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice, Orpheus went to seek his beloved Eurydice from the depths of Hades and was confronted by Cerberus. Orpheus played the beast a beautiful song on his lyre, and in an unprecedented move from Cerberus, Cerberus was so charmed and tamed by the music, he stood aside and let Orpheus in. Can't help but bop his 3 heads along to the rhythm. And finally, coming in at the number 1 spot is the manticore. A manticore has the head of a man, the body of a magnificent lion, and a massive tail of a scorpion replete with a poison stinger that stretches behind it. If somehow this isn't enough scary parts on one creature and you want more, some depictions of the manticore also show it having gigantic bat wings like a bat or a dragon. It uses its tail to sting its prey and leave them helpless, and is even able to fire off its stingers like a projectile, as if an arrow drawn from a bow. The manticore prefers to hunt by hiding its body in tall grass or the brush of the jungle, so only its head is poking out, appearing as a helpless, frail old man to a passerby that would find it in the woods. From here, it reverts to its true shape and strikes out at the victim, and once the wanderer notices that the old man in front of them has rows and rows of teeth inside its harrowing mouth, well, it's kind of already too late. One of the key traits of a manticore is that it never leaves behind any evidence. It consumes everything it preys on down to the last drop. It's as if you never existed. The word manticore is a loose translation of the Persian name for beast, Martikoras, and the legends that date back say the manticore was the true king of the jungle and was able to dominate any creature and devour any threat that came its way without leaving a trace behind, with one of its favorite targets being men, and preferably in groups. While eating one person would be delightful, it would wait there for groups of 3 to 4 people before it would strike for a proper feast. Number 5. Goblin shark. Under the sea is where nature starts to really let its creative juices flow. It's just an abstract world of tentacles, feelers, and razor-sharp teeth down there, like a Jackson Pollock, but for things that'll bite you. I know that little crab said it's better down where it's wetter, but I just don't know if I agree if things like the goblin shark are swimming around freely. I know that sounds kind of like I have a strong opinion about these things, and I do. The goblin shark is probably one of the scariest looking living creatures on the planet. The translucent skin really isn't helping matters. I mean, seriously. Google, try and find a cute photo of one of these things, even a little baby. Every single picture of it makes it look like something H.R. Giger would look at and think, maybe tone it down a bit. The goblin shark gets its name from its grotesque appearance. Sorry to all our goblin shark viewers, it's nothing personal. Its elongated nose and its unique unhinged jaws full of nail-like teeth. That nose isn't just for show either. It actually serves as a little prey detector for the goblin shark. The nose is filled with electroreceptors that allow it to pick up tiny electric fields of prey. It sneaks around the seabed using that little food finder to sniff out its next meal. Electrically charged tracking sharks with monstrous teeth. Wasn't that literally a joke in one of the Austin Powers movies? Goblin sharks actually can't even close their mouths fully, with their teeth always being visible, just to let you know what they're packing. I think as a general rule of thumb, you should stay away from any creature scientifically named after a goblin. That's advice that has done me well, that's advice that has served Spider-Man well, and I am passing that on to you. Having a good time so far? It would really make my day if you tossed a little old subscribe our way. Number 4, the Pacific Black Dragon. Now, this is an entry I could probably include solely on a name basis. You wouldn't even need to see a picture of it, and you just trust that the Pacific Black Dragon is a scary looking fish. However, I'm a visual learner, and you're watching a YouTube video, So we're going to include several pictures of one of Mother Nature's most precious little abhorrent monstrosities. Take a look at this thing. You would be forgiven for thinking that this thing popped out of that one guy's chest in Alien, because it looks way more like a chest burster than it does a fish. And for those keeping track at home, that's my second reference to the 1979 sci-fi classic, and it probably won't be the last in this video. This angry little noodle, occasionally referred to as the black sea dragon, gets its name from the fact that its skin absorbs 99.95% of the light in its habitat, which happens to be anywhere from 1,600,000 feet to 6,000 feet below the depths. Meaning this thing is dark. It hides in plain sight in the pitch black water, letting the bait hanging from its chin attract prey. Smaller fish swim up to what they think is something appetizing, and then the last thing they ever see is two beady little glowing eyes and then nothing. While this little fish is one of the smallest monsters on our list, I don't trust a fish that learned how to fish. There's something traitorous about that behavior. And honestly, maybe it's shallow, but I just can't move on from how truly horrifying this thing looks. I'm vapid, I can admit that. And I would love to see the megalodon snarf this thing up. Number 3, Japanese spider crab. How do spiders manage to get into everything? Doesn't matter where you are, you will find a spider crawling around in your apartment, up your shower, on your walls, on the toilet seat. I thought we would have been safe at least in the ocean, but I really should have known better. Introducing the Japanese spider crab, a creature pulled directly from my nightmares in my therapy sessions. These things look like they crawled out of the dankest depths and can grow up to 12 feet long. They can grow up to be 40 pounds, and if somehow one of its many legs gets severed, they can just regrow those no problem when they molt next. They're not just one of the longest crabs in the world, they also have possibly the longest lifespan of any crab, with a spider crab living to up to 100 years old. You're telling me there's a crabby longlegs walking around out there who was born in the 20s, still kicking about on the ocean floor, moving his little bowler hat, spinning his little crabby cane? Now, a little bit of cursory digging taught me two things about the spider crab to put my fears on ice. Apparently, these monsters, despite their outward appearance, are completely benevolent and are more content to scavenge around the ocean floor looking for scraps than they are ever likely to interact with a human, and are actually considered to be quite lazy by crab standards. Apparently, they taste amazing and are considered a delicacy in some parts of Japan. I know for me, a key part of exposure therapy and getting over any of my fears is to eat my fears, slathered in a buttery reduction, prepared over rice, maybe with a nice soy sauce. I'm looking at more pictures, and maybe I was totally wrong about the Japanese spider crab. I'm also very tall in a way that concerns people, and I'm very lazy, usually scavenging for my next meal as well. Although I am hoping that my next meal is a spider crab sushi combo. Number 2, stargazer. The stargazer is a fish that's got a face only Mother Nature could love, and even then, it looks like she might not be that generous. This thing kind of looks like if you buried a pug up to its face and then left it out in the sun for a few months. I don't think it's even too much of a stretch to say this might very well be the ugliest fish on the planet. Now, it's not a crime to be the ugliest fish on the planet, and you certainly wouldn't make a list of terrifying creatures just for being a little bit ugly. The stargazer earned its place on this list for also being one of the meanest fishes out there. It's always the ones you least expect. The stargazer has defensive capabilities that make it sound a lot more like it's a Pokemon than a fish. These things will bury themselves in the ocean floor, turning themselves into a little trap and then using their massive mouths as a vacuum and sucking their unsuspecting prey right up. And if that wasn't enough of an evolutionary selling point for you, the stargazer also has electric organs at the top of it, which transmit electric shocks to predators. That's a nasty little guy. And the name stargazer comes from the fact that when it's burrowing, it buries itself down, and the only thing peering out is its ugly little eyes peering upwards at the sky, or the stars. I gotta say, I got absolutely no love for these things. I like that they're very ugly, that's charming, but the rest of it, no. They're like scaly little zappy landmines. Number 1, Portuguese man-o-war. Of all the things on this list, the Portuguese man-o-war seems like it's the most not from this planet. It looks beautifully ethereal, like something you'd see floating around in the background in a Star Wars planet, or maybe hanging out with the blue things from Avatar. It's a truly cosmic looking wonder of nature. However, it is anything but. The first clue should be the fact that it is named after a 17th century battleship. It looks a bit like a jellyfish, but in actuality, it's a strange little colonial organism made up of smaller organisms called zooids. See, this already sounds like I'm talking about an alien, a zooid. You gonna look me in the eyes and tell me a zooid is real? This thing actually isn't even an animal per se, but 3 organisms in a trench coat trying to sneak into the movies. The main zooid is a gas-filled translucent sac, which coincidentally is what my 10th grade gym teacher used to call me to motivate me to run around the track faster. The gas-filled sac allows the colony to float. The man-o-war has no means of movement, instead having to rely on the currents of the ocean to direct it around. Real go-with-the-flow type of organism. Not a bad attitude, to be honest. Now the next zooid, I am never gonna get used to saying that, are the tentacles, which are really the star of the show here. The tentacles on a man-of-war reach lengths of up to 165 feet. Now I'll run that by you in case you heard that, fainted, and didn't quite catch what I said. Get up off the floor. Their tentacles can get up to 165 feet long. That's really long. The tentacles, which mind you, carry a sting like a jellyfish's. It's been known to cause paralysis, is enough to kill a fish, and has been on some occasions enough to be lethal to humans. One Redditor recounts a painful story of a vacation to Cuba, strolling a beach and seeing what they thought was a plastic bag floating in the water. They then went to pick it up, and as they described, the next thing I knew, I woke up in the hospital in a vinegar bath with a morphine drip, a team of doctors extracting the tentacles that were stuck into my hand. That's enough to keep me away from the water for a bit and maybe prevent myself from ever doing a good deed, try to pick up some litter. I feel like even the Megalodon might want to be careful around this strange monster.
Number 5, Nephilim. This one I can get behind for sure. How the pyramids were built still baffles me, and reading all about these things at least makes my brain relax for a second. The giants, the talls, the long neck people, the Nephilim. Again, never been a Bible guy myself, so no judgment if you say all this happened, but I'm just catching up on all this stuff. But in short, the Nephilim were like the offspring of angels and human women, according to Genesis 6:1-4 and Jude. The Nephilim are also mentioned in Numbers 13:33, but it is likely that by this time in Israel's history, Nephilim was used as a term for a tall, intimidating peoples. It's plausible that the Nephilim were both half angels and half giants, making them absolutely huge and absolutely super strong. The Nephilim were the children of the sons of gods and daughters of men, and Christian scholars have theorized that the sons of gods were actually these demonic fallen angels who reproduced with women. Being the offspring of partial angelic heredity, the Nephilim were considered mighty men who are of old the men of renown. The ancients. These people were huge, claiming that they were like 5 times the size of an average man. In the Hebrew Bible, a group of mysterious beings or people of unusually large size and length who lived both before and after the flood were called Nephilimus, sometimes translated to giants. Even the fallen ones, from the Hebrew nephil, meaning to fall. Seems like these people were writing about similar stuff, huh? Spooky. Number 4, 200 million horsemen. This next one is not really a creature as much as it's the end of a lot of all of us. All this Armageddon stuff they were saying, that's some pretty strange stuff that's on its way. Book of Revelation stuff, you know? Quote, I saw as God wanted to show me the horses and the men on them. The men had pieces of iron on their chests. These were red like fire and blue like the sky and yellow like sulfur. The heads of the horses looked like the heads of lions. Fire and smoke and sulfur came out of their mouths. 1/3 part of all man was killed by the fire and smoke and sulfur that came out of their mouths. Word for word. Horsemen or ancient biblical technology? This sounds horrifying. Also, 200 million? That's a lot of flying flaming horses just trucking around the skies and sands like giant tanks, firing fire out of their mouths and nose. As I looked, behold, a stormy wind came out of the north, and a great cloud with brightness around it, and fire flashing forth continually, and in the midst of the fire, as it were gleaming metal. And from the midst of all this came likeness of 4 living creatures, and this was their appearance. They had a human likeness. Okay. You put a Baja hoodie on me at a Dave Matthews concert and hear me saying all that stuff, you probably just think I'm some sci-fi stoner. Nope. This is riveting material, folks. I need to read this thing front to back. Apparently this force was supposed to have taken out, or is going to take out, 1/3 of the entire world's population. I know like 3 things that can do that. Pandemics, missiles, and floods. However, if men and horses showed up with lion heads breathing fire, it's safe to say it's game over. Number 3, the Leviathan. Okay, at first I was like, oh, that's a roller coaster at Canada's Wonderland. No, this vicious monster was actually modeled after this vicious monster. The Leviathan, the second of the great monsters described in the book of Job. This Leviathan is an absolute massive sea monster who's impervious to human weapons, breathes fire, and emits smoke from his nostrils. So this is a Zelda boss for sure. The Leviathan is probably related to another ancient monster called Loten, a seven-headed giant serpent who represents primeval chaos, as with pretty much every other biblical creature does. Hey, these things aren't meant to be cute and fuzzy. There's some less exciting theories that insist the Leviathan is just a dramatic interpretation of a crocodile or anaconda or maybe a plesiosaur, resembling something like the Loch Ness Monster. But that doesn't explain the breathing fire thing, or the size. Was this giant sea snake a water dragon? Because apparently it's like 300 miles long. Yeah, terrifying. Scary thing now is many different religions and cultures have their own version of the Leviathan. Tiamat, Hydra, Jormungandr. Maybe this thing was just hunted into extinction. I don't know. What do you think? Number 2, Archangel Michael. It is said that the angels are not humans, but creatures made from God's creation. I've also seen what the Bible describes angels looking like, and it's not handsome people with wings. Apparently a lot of these things, people really couldn't even describe what they were seeing in front of them. But we'll get to what these things look like in a minute. Of those creatures, Satan, aka Lucifer, is one. The one. However, here is even one creature that Satan fears more than any creature, and that's fellow Archangel Michael. Or Saint Michael. Some say they're brothers, some say they were on the same team for a bit. This is some good stuff, people. Quote, "Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him." Revelation 12:7-9. Okay, so hold on. He and them are all down here with us? That's terrifying. Apparently Michael led that army that won, so whatever scares Satan scares the hell out of me as well. Also, all these pictures and statues of him and like window panes are all of him like wielding a giant sword made of light, just stepping on Satan's back as a hero. That's pretty intimidating, not gonna lie. And coming in at the number 1 spot, Ophanim. Okay, so what angels actually looked like apparently was like giant geometrical feathers with eyes and a consciousness. Some had horns, some had hooves, lots of gold and metal colors. This next thing doesn't even make sense to my brain. I feel like this is an anthill trying to understand an iPhone. Quote, "As I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the ground beside each creature with its 4 faces. This was the appearance and structure of the wheels. They sparked like topaz, and all 4 looked alike. Each appeared to be made like a wheel, intersecting a wheel. As they moved, they would go in any one of the 4 directions the creatures were faced. The wheels did not change direction as the creatures went. Their rims were high and awesome, and all 4 rims were full of eyes all around." Ezekiel 1:15-18. First off, is this thing even a creature? Yeah, everything I see here is an alien. Is this just us trying to process some sort of like energy being with eyes? Because if I saw Lucifer that looks like the hunk on the Netflix show, and then I saw this thing? One of the Dead Sea Scrolls interprets them as angels. Late sections of the Book of Enoch interprets them as class of celestial beings who don't sleep and guard the throne of God. Whatever this thing or things are, it sounds and looks absolutely horrifying. How could you paint that on a ceiling? I would just give up and paint wings and a halo as well. For real though, like that is a spaceship of some sort, isn't it? I mean, I understand the times, maybe the science wasn't there, but this thing is straight out of a sci-fi novel. Number 5, the Behemoth. You wanted 5 more creatures, and I wanted an excuse to keep reading this thing. This book is terrifying. Speaking of, did you know that there's a herbivore creature plated in spikes and armor with a tail the size of an oak tree, head like a lion, swallowing up rivers, just roaming around back then? Yeah, apparently. The Behemoth. This Goliath of a beast was one of the first talked about. Not the first beast, that's a completely different thing. Also terrifying. The Behemoth. God's secret weapon, and apparently the first thing he created. Hadn't made us in his image yet, so this hippo tank Elder Scrolls boss was what God went with. One of the most popular and revered creatures in the Bible. Quote, "Behold now, Behemoth, which I made with thee. He eateth grass like an ox. He moveth his tail like a cedar. His bones are as strong as pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron." Yeah, this is definitely a dinosaur, right? Scholars seem to think that the behemoth is an aggressive exaggeration of a large hippopotamus or rhinoceros. Opening up its mouth and swallowing a river could literally mean it's just an animal thirsty. In 2003, French scientists working in Pakistan claimed to have discovered an extinct species of rhinoceros called a blackorgon, which was much larger, much scarier, and matched the physical description given in the Book of Job. Yeah, that's terrifying stuff. Number 4, cherubim. These cute flying baby angels we see on soap ads and bottles are a lot scarier and much more sinister than the blonde cupids we're used to seeing. The cherubs, or cherubim, are God's throne bearers and appear over 90 times in the Bible. The Hebrew text says cherubim is a celestial winged being who represents God's spirit on earth and symbolizes the worship of God. In Ezekiel, cherubim are described as angelic creatures with 2 sets of wings and 4 faces: lion, ox, human, and eagle. Okay, this is getting scarier and scarier. The 4 faces of the cherubim apparently represent the 4 domains of God's rule. The lion represents wild animals, man represents humanity, ox represents domestic animals, and the eagle represents birds. Aren't those all wild animals? I don't know. The cherubim appear in several texts of the Bible, including Genesis, Ezekiel, Kings, and Revelation. Yeah, so lots of people were seeing these things, and they all kind of sound somewhat the same. They all oddly say 4 faces. Like every which way they turned, they could see a face. Some say, quote, they move quickly, using a wheel within a wheel, and their wings cover their body. Question, what's with all the wheels? People just like looking up into the sky all day must have had like severe floaters in their eyes, because a wheel and a cute baby angel thing look completely different, no? A conjoined wingspan of the 4 cherubim are described as forming a divine chariot, the so-called mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. 2 cherubim make the ark and form a space through which Yahweh would appear in Ezekiel's visions. The status of the cherubim are a sort of vehicle for Yahweh in the book of Samuel. So in a sense, they're kind of God's messengers, you know, bringing things up and down from him and to him, including him. Gotcha. A vehicle. Yeah, a vehicle. These images are terrifying. Yeah, and that's a mothership right there. That's a mothership. Okay? Number 3, unicorns. Hold up. This is scarier than the devil, right? Unicorns? Really? Oh yeah. No, not the glittery ones with Farrah Fawcett hair like Hercules rides. More like a firstborn bull. Giant, with a huge spear on its head. He has majesty, and his horns are the horns of a wild ox, and with them he shall gore the peoples, all of them, to the ends of the earth. Okay, yeah, that's really aggressive. I guess unicorns were a little bit scarier in the Bible, huh? A couple times these things are brought up too. It seems like a lot of people were seeing these. Yeah, I'd say a hunk in a suit on a television series is much less scary than a monster horse goring you to death. A ram is mentioned 9 times in the Hebrew Bible. It's been translated to unicorn in the King James Version, and some translations as oryx, which was seen as a wild ox or rhinoceros. Quote, and the unicorn shall come down with them, and the bullocks with the bulls, and their land shall be soaked with blood, and their dust made fat with fatness. Yeah, harsh. I mean, rhinos and other single-horned animals do this. The Bible describes unicorns skipping like calves, traveling like bulls, and bleeding when they die, so they were real and very mortal, mostly believed to be an exaggeration though. Even Julius Caesar speaks of them. Quote, a little below the elephant in size and appearance, color, and shape of a bull, their strength and speed are extraordinary. They spare neither man nor wild beast. Were the ancients seeing like giant extinct rhinos, or were these flying evil narwhals just goring everyone to the end of the earth? Who knows? Sure sounds like it. Number 2, locusts. Dude, I'm already afraid of the 12-inch flying praying mantises that do exist today. I can't imagine what these things looked like. Imagine a dog-sized flying insect blocking out the sun because there's so many of them. Abaddon's locusts. These things were terrifying. The Bible has this to say about them. The 5th angel, apparently Abaddon, sounded his trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from the sky to the earth. The star was given the key to the shaft of the abyss. When he opened the abyss, smoke rose from it like the smoke from a gigantic furnace. The sun and sky were darkened by smoke from the abyss, and out of the smoke, locusts came down upon the earth and were given power like that of scorpions. These demon bugs are well detailed in the Bible. They're described as, quote, horse-like creatures preparing for battle, adorned with crowns of gold above their head. Their face is like a man, but woman's hair with lion's teeth. Their body was locust-like, covered with iron breastplates. They have scorpion-like stings on their tails and razor-sharp claws, and the sound of their army will be like 1,000,000 horses marching to the battlefield. Dude, that's a locust? Like a locust, the bug? No, I don't think so. They will be freed by their master Abaddon from the bottomless pit and will torment all of the remaining sinners on Earth for 5 months. Abaddon is described as the king of the army of locusts. Yeah, guy's really into bugs. Yeah, that's like some Fear Factor stuff right there. Just like a million bugs swarming you? No thanks. And coming in at number 1, the dragon. Okay, there's some speculation here that this thing is the devil himself. The devil and the dragon. But also this thing apparently lives with the devil. I don't know, people were saying mixed things, but important thing is, things weren't too literal back then and they were really spiritual. People were just trying to explain what they were seeing and feeling the best way they could. But yes, there was dragons. Yeah, we have the skeleton bones. Okay? And before you're picturing something fun like Dudley the Dragon or the ones that talk in The Hobbit who sit atop gold, no. Picture when it sneezes, it flashes light. Its eyes are like the red of dawn. Lightning leaps from its mouth. Flames of fire flash out. Smoke streams from its nostrils like steam from a pot heated over burning rushes. Its breath would kindle coals, for flames shoot from its mouth. Yeah, this thing. Terrifying. Tremendous strength of Leviathan's neck strikes terror wherever it goes. Its flesh is hard and firm and cannot be penetrated. Job 41:18-23. This great dragon, the ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, the one deceiving the whole world, was thrown down to the earth with all the angels. And I saw 3 evil spirits that looked like frogs leap from its mouth of the dragon, the beast and the false prophet. They are demonic spirits who work miracles and go out to the rulers of the world to gather them for battle against the Lord on that great judgment day of God the Almighty. He seized the dragon, that old serpent who is the devil, Satan, and bound him in chains for thousands years. The angel threw him into the bottomless pit, which he then shut and locked so Satan could not deceive the nations anymore until 1,000 years were finished. Okay, yeah, that sounds like one giant amazing cutscene from a God of War game. Just chucking a dragon into a pit? Also, it's 2022. We better lock that thing back up. It's been more than 1,000 years now, no? Quote, and behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 diadems. Okay, so it wears 7 crowns. Maybe this thing is the devil. It's mentioned numerous times in the Bible. I've seen Game of Thrones. This thing is scary. Yeah.
Number 5 on this list is the Panama 7. The following story happened only a few years ago and is a horrifying tale where 7 people in Panama were found dead from a terrifying ritual. The BBC writes 10 people have been arrested on suspicion of murder. The suspects and all victims were thought to belong to the Nagobi indigenous community. The grave was discovered after 3 villagers escaped and made their way to a local hospital last weekend, prosecutor Rafael Baloy said. They then alerted authorities about several families being held by an indigenous-run sect. On Wednesday, police raided the community located in a jungle region in northwest Panama, some 250 kilometers from the capital Panama City. They were performing a ritual inside the structure. In that ritual, there were people being held against their will, being mistreated, said Mr. Balois. All of these rites were aimed at killing them if they didn't repent their sins. Inside the makeshift church, officers found a naked woman, machetes, knives, and a ritually sacrificed goat, Mr. Balois said. The site was controlled by a religious sect called the New Light of God, believed to have been operating in the region for about 3 months. According to Mr. Balois, the kidnapping and torture started last Saturday after one of the members claimed to have received a message from God. The victims were then kidnapped from their homes, beaten, and so let me ask you guys, does that sound like something that God would tell you to do? Gather up a bunch of people, hold them against their will, and torture and kill them? To me, if any sort of entity was to tell you to do something like that, then that would be a demon or maybe the devil. Maybe that demonic entity would portray themselves as God or someone else, but I don't know what type of God would do something like this. To be completely honest, folks, I'm really not a religious person, so when I hear something like this, I believe that this was the work of people who were extremely sick or misguided. But I can guarantee to them, they probably really felt like they were acting as the vessel for some higher being. I think in this instance though, they really did misjudge who that higher being was. This happened literally back in 2020 as well, guys, so really not that long ago. My heart truly does go out to the people that were killed and to the families of those who were taken way too soon. Number 4 on this list is The Devil Made Me Do It. This famous Ed and Lorraine case may be the best example of when someone tried to claim a demonic possession led to a crime. The case is centered around a young man named Orrin Cheyenne Johnson and the man that he murdered, a 40-year-old named Alan Bono. Mental Floss says there was no question that Johnson killed Bono. However, his defense attorney, 33-year-old Martin Minella, planned to argue that the 19-year-old was not guilty by virtue of demonic possession. Ahead of the trial, Minella pled his case through the media, giving interviews to major press outlets. The courts have dealt with the existence of God, and now they'll be asked to deal with the existence of the demonic spirit, Minella told People. The day after Johnson was arrested, Lorraine Warren called the Brookfield police and blamed the killing on a demon. Johnson didn't actually say the devil made him do it, he only claimed that he didn't remember stabbing Bono. However, according to the testimony of an officer on the scene, Johnson did tell the police, "I think I hurt someone." Now, this defense didn't actually work out for Johnson. He was inevitably convicted of first-degree manslaughter and sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. However, he didn't serve nearly that many and was released after less than 5 years for being a really good prisoner. In my opinion, I kind of doubt that this guy was actually under the influence of a demonic possession, and clearly the jury, they felt the same way. That being said though, he did seem pretty committed to that story during the trial, so I suppose it's something to consider. Number 3 on this list is Manuel Vela. Several years ago, Manuel Vela killed his pregnant girlfriend. It was a brutal murder and an incident which climaxed in a police chase where he was finally captured. Many people obviously asked the question, why? And the answer may shock you. The Mystique says Vela told the interviewers that the murder of his girlfriend and her child were part of a religious and political statement. He was possibly trying to enlighten the crowd of his opinion on pro-life ideologies. However, it seemed like his motivation behind the murders wasn't just politically backed. He went on to say how he is the Antichrist and the voices in his head guided him on what to do. Many of his analogies were akin to things that have happened in the history of Christianity. Vela literally believed that he was the Antichrist, guys. That sounds like a pretty textbook example of a demonic possession to me. At this point, Vela's competency to stand trial was in question and a hearing needed to be done. Manuel never actually made it to the hearing though, because in January 2017, authorities found him dead in his cell. He had taken his own life. Number 2 on this list is the Son of Sam. The Son of Sam was a killer that caused one of the biggest citywide police investigations ever. Ranker says New York City during the summer of 1976 was a hotbed of anger, frustration, and fear, and David Berkowitz, aka the Son of Sam, didn't help the matter by killing 6 people and wounding 7 others in the span of 1 year. After his arrest, Berkowitz told police that he was under the control of a demon named Harvey who inhabited his neighbor's dog and implored him to kill people. Once, during a 3-month break from his murder spree, Berkowitz wrote the New York Post to say, "I am still here like a spirit roaming the night, thirsty, hungry, seldom stopping to rest." After being incarcerated, Berkowitz received a sentence of 365 years in prison, by the way. He became a born-again Christian, but he still believes that the devil and God are fighting for possession of his soul. No wonder this guy got 365 years. Not only did he kill 6 people, but to write to the Times saying that he's still thirsty and hungry, yeah. This is clearly a man that needs to be kept behind bars for literally ever. Once again, I want to stress the fact here that I'm not a religious man personally. When I hear a story like this, I believe that it's far more likely that the Son of Sam was just truly mentally unstable and probably in need of some very serious help. He truly believed, though, that a demon had called upon him and was using his body as a vessel for evil. We may never know what truly caused him to do this, but at least he's locked up for good and won't be doing it again anytime soon. And finally, number 1 on this list is Michael Taylor. Several decades ago, Taylor was apparently possessed by a horrible demon, and this time it really got the better of him. Ranker says in 1974, Michael Taylor was just a simple butcher living in Ossett, England, who was suddenly overcome by an evil spirit. He had an exorcism performed on October 5th and 6th of 1974, and while it went okay, the priests weren't able to expel
all of the demons. According to Bill Ellis, an authority on folklore and the occult in contemporary culture, in an all-night ceremony, the exorcist believed that they had invoked and cast out at least 40 demons, including those of incest, bestiality, blasphemy, and lewdness. At the end, exhausted, they allowed Taylor to go home, although they felt that at least 3 demons, insanity, murder, and violence, were still left in him. So, you know, kind of the big 3. After he returned home, Taylor immediately murdered his wife by ripping out her eyes and tongue and then tearing off most of the skin from her face, finally strangling their pet poodle. Police found Taylor standing in the street naked and covered in blood, shouting, "It is the blood of Satan." This is truly one of the most graphic crimes I've ever read about, honestly. Like, to think that this happened in real life is extremely scary. Also, if he was possessed by some type of demon, like, what demon was this and how do we all avoid this? I feel like this is pretty pertinent information considering what Taylor ended up doing.